Morena, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou, and good morning everyone. And I better put my screen on, start my video, and you'll see me briefly there. We'll start this morning with a roll call from Sandra, just to check that we've got everybody online. Sandra.
Okay. Oh, Mayor Goff, you're here.
Absolutely.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore. No, he's going to be late. Councillor Bartley.
Hello for everybody.
Councillor Casey.
Morena.
Councillor Collins.
Hello for everyone.
Councillor Coombe is going to be late. Councillor Cooper.
Hello for lava.
Councillor Dalton.
Hello for everyone.
Councillor Darby.
Morning, everyone.
Councillor Filipaina.
Hello, lava.
IMSB member Henare.
Present and accounted for.
Councillor Henderson.
Hello for lava.
Councillor Hills.
Morning, everyone.
Councillor Mulholland.
Hello for lava.
Councillor Newman. Not there. Councillor Sayers.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Hello for lava, everyone. Morning.
Councillor Stewart.
Present.
IMSB Chair Taipere. Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Hello for lava.
Councillor Young.
Tala for lava.
We're still looking for Councillor. Sorry, I think we're still looking for Councillor Newman and Councillor Walker. So I'll get Sandra just to follow up there. Yeah, look, we've got a pretty full agenda today, as you will have seen, and it's going to be slightly unusual because we're going to be jumping from emergency committee into governing body and back again and in and out of confidential on a couple of occasions. So please bear with us, and we'll try and make sure we've got that all well organised. In calling for apologies, can I just note with sadness the passing of Councillor Fletcher's husband, Tony, and maybe we could just take a moment to think of the sadness that she's feeling at the moment with her loss. And I've sent from the Mayor's office an acknowledgement of that loss, and I know that many of you have done likewise. But we're thinking of Councillor Fletcher at this sad and difficult time for her. In terms of other apologies, I have Deputy Mayor Cashmore and Councillor Pippa Coombe for lateness on council business. Are there any other apologies? If not, I'll move that we accept the apology from Councillor Fletcher for absence, and Deputy Mayor Cashmore and Councillor Coombe for lateness on council business. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson to second. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We have... is there anyone with an interest in relation to today's agenda that they need to declare at this point? If not, we'll move on to confirmation of minutes. We have one set of minutes from the 21st of May 2020. So I'll move that the minutes are a true and correct record.
Second, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Cooper.
Councillor Cooper, seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much. Petitions, we have no petitions. We have no public input. We have no local board input, and I've not been informed of any extraordinary items. So we come now to the first item on our agenda today, which is going to be a discussion of the adoption of consultation material for the emergency budget for 2020-21. And this item and the following item, which we will consider later in the morning on the Queen's Wharf mooring dolphin, are confidential for reasons of financial implications, and the second item being before the Environment Court. So I'll move at this point that we move to exclude the public from those two parts of the meeting. Do I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second, Councillor Dalton.
Councillor Dalton, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And to the contrary, no. It's been passed on one voice vote. Okay, look, we now have to close out of the Open Emergency Committee Skype meeting and Open and Confidential Emergency Committee Skype meeting. So that will just take a couple of minutes. I think people are familiar now with what they need to do there. So we'll resume this meeting in approximately 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay. Right, I'll do the roll call now while you're checking that if you like. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, sorry about this once again. Won't it be great when we can get back together? Just checking, we've got everyone. Bill Cashmore.
Present.
Josephine Bartley.
Present.
Kathy Casey.
Yep, I'm here, Phil.
Thank you. Fesso Collins. Fesso, have we got you there? Come back to you. Pippa Coombe.
Talofa, kia ora.
Thank you. Linda Cooper.
Aye.
Aye. Angela Dalton.
Present.
Chris Darby.
With you.
Al Filipina.
Here, Your Worship.
Shane Henderson.
Kia ora.
Richard Hills.
Here.
Tracy Mulholland.
Lava.
Daniel Newman.
Good morning, Your Worship.
Greg Sayers.
Present, Your Worship.
Leslie Simpson.
Talofa lava, I'm here, Your Worship.
Thank you. Sharon Stewart. Sharon. Okay, we'll just come back on Sharon. Wayne Walker.
Isn't him recovering from Skype trauma?
We're glad to have you here. John Watson
Talofa again.
and Paul Young.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Right, we've just got a double check on two others. Fesso, I've got you on my screen.
Yes, I'm here now, Mayor. Thank you.
Great. And Sharon.
No.
Okay, I'm going to just wait a
She's trying
minute.
to join again. She's just texted me, so she's coming.
Okay, we'll just wait 1 minute for Sharon to be with us. Jesus.
Everybody. This is where I labelled it.
Okay. Right, we're just waiting for Sharon still.
Yeah, you need to.
So I'm still waiting, I think, for Sharon. I may just go through the early items while she's joining up because it's just the standard items that we need to go through. So we commence with the affirmation. Tēnā tātou katoa. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. We come first of all to apologies. I have recorded the apology of Councillor Chris Fletcher and acknowledged our condolences for her bereavement. Are there any other apologies? If not, I'll move that we accept the apology from Councillor Fletcher. Do I have a seconder of that, please?
Yes, you do, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Declaration of interest. Are there any councillors that need to declare any interest in the items that we're about to discuss? Confirmation of minutes. We have the minutes for confirmation of the 30th of April 2020. I will move that these are a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, you do.
It's Councillor Simpson again, is it? Yep, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We have no petitions. We have no public input. We have no local board input. I've been informed of no extraordinary items. We now have two items that are under an open session. The first is the adoption of recommendations of the 21st of we may not need Andrew, but be helpful to have it. You are there, Andrew. This was a paper that we worked through at an earlier emergency meeting, so adoption of it is really pro forma, but I'll just double check if anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to make. If not, I'll put... Sorry, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, and just for the public record, the clauses that were amended in a number of items, but particularly the one that was of interest to me was D2. As much as we are adopting these recommendations today, there is that clause in there subject to consideration of any further feedback received on this issue. And of course, there will be individuals and groups that will be feeding back on these issues. And of course, we assume that will be given the due credence that it deserves at that time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Are there any other questions or comments? If so, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make the comment. I know that this comment has already been made in our previous discussions, but just as this paper is about to go out for consultation, I wanted to offer a word of thanks. And I was again on the phone with both Chairs Lotu and Le Maunga this morning, and both of them wanted to re-express their thanks for the way in which Councillor Simpson allowed the local board chairs to be part of the discussions when a lot of this material was being discussed. So I just thought it was important for public record that those local board chairs had their voices heard in thanking Councillor Simpson for a very open process where they were able to ask questions. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Collins. Are there any further questions or comments? If not, I will put the... sorry, I'm just a bit slow on reading my side column. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. And as this goes out for consultation, I actually also want to acknowledge our communications staff for the challenges that they have worked to address in preparing a communication strategy for this. Just to acknowledge and to reiterate what Councillor Watson has said, I think there will be a need for further consideration of some of the proposed budget adjustments, and we may need to make further tweaks. But it's important that Aucklanders know that there are some things in here that fundamentally won't be able to be changed, and the reality is that we're going to have to cut our cloth to fit the reality of our new budget position. But I hope that within that there is still an opportunity for debate around how this will impact in terms of its operational impact on vulnerable communities in my ward and other parts of Auckland as well, because some people have a greater degree of resilience than others.
Thank you very much, Councillor Newman. Are there any further comments?
Your Worship, sorry.
Councillor Filipaina.
Your Worship, can I just a point of clarification that what we are voting on is through to the recommendation that relates to the consultation we had before, and that we have a confidential item after this that relates to the consultation documents that go out for the emergency budget.
That's correct. This item deals with rates and fees, so those are the sort of things that we were talking about with the waste management base service targeted rate and the standard refuse rate for Auckland and Manukau, etc. Next, we deal in open session with the emergency budget public consultation approach. Again, probably pretty much pro forma because we discussed that fully in the emergency committee. Then we go into confidential to approve the recommendation that the emergency committee has just made to the governing body. So that's the item dealing with the adoption of the consultation material. Is that clear?
Yeah, it is, Your Worship, and will then, once that confidential item under the committee we're in now, once, which is the governing body, once we discuss the confidential item, will we then put it back into public forum to approve to go out to our communities?
We pass, by passing this, that means that it is approved for consultation and that the documents will be published to the wider community tomorrow. But I'll just seek Andrew, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, I have nothing to add, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay, are there any further comments?
Mr. Chair, I'm confused because when you go into governing body on Nexus and it says agenda, it says emergency committee, but then the confidential says governing body, and that's what's confusing because in this agenda, it's just got number 8 is COVID briefing, 9 is water supply, and that's what's confusing.
Okay.
Am I in the wrong place?
Yep. We're currently in governing body, and under governing body, we need to pass the 2 items set out in the open agenda and the 1 item set out in confidential, which is the adoption of the consultation material. When we have dealt with those items, we will revert to the open session of the emergency committee, which deals with COVID-19 and with the water and wastewater bylaw. Is that clear?
Yes, but when you open the governing body agenda on Nexus,
yeah,
it says emergency committee. That is what is confusing.
Okay, I don't know whether, Sandra, you can help with that.
It hasn't got this in it. That's
okay.
What I'm...
Okay, I'm sorry.
Don't worry, I'll vote for it anyway.
Okay.
What's in front of us on the screen is not in our. Okay. I can't find in our agenda.
Okay, my apologies for that. That's not something that's under my control. But hopefully, I've spelt out now exactly what we're doing, and people are clear on that. Hopefully, that's helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions? Otherwise, I will put the motion that moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Simpson, that we adopt item 9 on the agenda, the rates and fees issues for the emergency budget. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. We now come to item 10 on the agenda, which is the adoption of the recommendations of the Emergency Committee on the 21st of May on the budget public consultation approach. I need a mover for that. Can I ask, sorry, please, that's Councillor Cooper? Simpson. Can I ask for a seconder for that, please?
Efeso.
Efeso, Collins, seconded. I'll just double check. Have I got Wendy Phillip on the call, or Tim Aiken, or Ken Aiolupatia? I may not, but this is, as I said, pro forma. We discussed this. I think it was passed unanimously by the Emergency Committee last week. So I'll just double check if there is anyone that wishes to make a comment. Or who wants to ask a question on this?
These items are wrong, or we don't have them in our agenda. So the last one wasn't in our agenda either. And we know what the content is, but it's not in governing body.
Yeah, I've got the advantage of having a hard copy in front of me from the 21st of May. So this was about public consultation running from the 29th of May to the 19th of June. That feedback can be, I'm reading recommendation A, that feedback can be provided through written, telephone and digital channels. A3, regional and local reports will be prepared to provide a summary of public feedback received across all channels. A4, a summary of final decisions made, will be prepared in July and widely communicated. So is everybody with me on that?
We don't have
Come up
that
now.
yet.
Mr. Mayor, it's on the email emailed out by Sandra and in Councillor's email accounts if they can't.
Oh, thanks, John. Sorry, I'm going from Nexus. Thank you.
Okay, I apologise. I know this is rather confusing because of the way we've shifted from committee to governing body, etc. I just took the precaution of bringing the papers with me that we'd looked at last week, and I imagined that everybody was familiar with those. But my apologies if we haven't got it in the place that you were expecting. Okay, so the second part of the recommendations was to recommend to the governing body to delegate to the following elected members and staff the power and responsibility to engage with the public online for online webinar events as part of the consultation approach, and that was councillors, local board chairs and members, and Tier 2 and Tier 3 staff, and any additional staff approved by the Group Chief Financial Officer. So just to remind you all, we discussed this fairly fully last week, and I think it was passed unanimously. So this is pro forma in the sense that the governing body now has to approve what we, wearing a different hat under the Emergency Committee, decided last week. Okay, so are there any further questions or comments about that?
I'll make a comment, Your Worship, if that's all right.
Yep, Councillor Simpson.
I just want to make the point that I believe that Council have done all that they can under very extenuating circumstances to adopt our normal consultation process to fit with COVID-19 impacts. And I want to thank them for that, and I want Aucklanders to be made aware that we are doing everything that we can to ensure that they have an opportunity to have their say. This is extenuating circumstances. Our budgetary process for the next year has been turned upside down. COVID-19 has created fiscal uncertainty and has an unprecedented financial hole in our revenue. So we really need Aucklanders to be able to understand that and have their say. And they've been challenged because of COVID-19. They've been challenged and we've been challenged in being able to get that information across. So I think it's really important. Look, we will pass a consultation document. We've tried to make it easy, but at the end of the day, it's about communicating it's about communicating our problem and making sure that Aucklanders understand that problem and have the opportunity to feedback in a way that is easy for them. So I just want to thank the staff. I want to thank my colleagues for assisting us, put together the best that we can under the circumstances, and let's get Auckland back on track and thank everyone for the work that they've done to date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson. Any other questions or comments? If not, I shall put the resolutions, the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 No. Carried. Thank you very much. Now, we come to the last item on the governing body agenda, which is confidential C1, which is the approval of the adoption of the consultation material for the emergency budget, annual budget 2020-2021. This contains information that needs to be discussed under confidentiality. So I'll move that the public be excluded from this part of the agenda. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
Second, if you saw.
Seconded by Councillor Collins. I'll put that resolution.
Can I just ask a question on that, Mr. Mayor, please?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah. So just in terms of procedure, I appreciate a little clarification. We discussed in the emergency committee in confidential all the matters to do with the consultation document. I understand that. We had the confidential section in the emergency budget today, which was agreed upon that document going out. We're now we're in governing body, we're going into confidential for this item, which that the document is to be released tomorrow. In normal circumstances, that sequence of events would result in this being heard in the open meeting. So I don't quite understand why we're going into confidential to approve a document we've already approved an emergency and which is being released to the public tomorrow. Could someone please explain that to me?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Watson. I'll ask Kevin Ramsey to speak to that, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. What we have to do is carefully control this to ensure that we do meet our statutory obligations for the New Zealand Stock Exchange as well as the Overseas Exchange. So there'll be a disclosure committee after this meeting, and that'll weigh up the points you've actually now reached and assess whether we have to do a exchange release of any sort. After that, there will then be the noon tomorrow. We'll be publicly releasing anything anyway. As far as the documentations, the consultation documents supporting information will become available too. So this is purely to meet the stock exchange requirements to ensure that we manage the release of any confidential or interest or information of interest to the market.
Your Worship, can I ask a question, please?
Yep, Councillor Simpson.
So my question is, I understand that, or I understood that till I opened the Herald this morning, and surely most of the information that we're consulting on is being covered in public now. I mean, we're aware of the information, so why can't it be public now? I just need some clarity.
Absolutely not, because I looked at the Herald article this morning too, and it doesn't refer to any of the items that might need to be disclosed to the New Zealand Stock Exchange. There are no figures, no information that has been improperly released in any of the comments made by Kevin, myself, or by other councillors that were interviewed for that.
Yes. And yeah, if I can just add to that, Your Worship, and the information that was released there was actually preceded by a stock exchange release which referred purely to the size of the revenue gap. None of the information around the possible mitigations, which is being discussed there, and how that's going to be presented to the public has been picked up by any of the media yet, because that has not been released, and that'll be released at noon tomorrow. How we're going to address that revenue gap, what are the mitigations, what are the options available that we wish to hear from our public on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got two other. Sorry, Councillor Watson, you've got a further question?
Yeah. So without labouring the point, Mr. Mayor, when we go out for annual plans or long-term plans, that final approval appears in the governing body in open. In these circumstances, I understand what's being said. It's going out anyway in less than 24 hours. Would it not have been possible to prepare, given that it's been fairly clear that it was going to be approved, a simultaneous release to cover that obligation? So then we could have had this in the open meeting, prior to it being publicised. I guess what I'm saying, Mr. Mayor, it really denies the elected representatives then, the ability to make comments that they may think appropriate for the public prior to seeing that document. So in essence, the document itself appears for the public without the benefit of elected representatives, making any points of view if they choose to do so.
I'll come to Kevin in just a second. My understanding is that it's not appropriate for officials to release to the stock exchange something that hasn't been formally passed yet by the governing body. But Kevin, would you like to comment further on that?
Exactly, Your Worship, and it's also the comment that Councillor Simpson made earlier. The time constraints this time is quite different. Normally we have that week between, so we understand the decisions you've made and what is going to be presented. We can consider that and have an opportunity then to come back in the governing body for the final adoption and actually make the decision. There's usually a week between. Today we did not know if there was going to be any conversation today, any decisions made which would alter what we're about to disclose tomorrow. There just was not time to actually have that intermediary step that you've referred to. It's down to time constraints again.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. I have questions from, first of all, Councillor Al Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's the reason why I asked the question of clarification earlier, because there were comments being made about the consultation document on the item that related to the rates and fees. All our consultation that we have had around the consultation document, as well as the supporting information have been in confidential. So at what stage, and not talking about the information that relates to the communication with the stock exchange, but at what stage do we as governing body approve the material in the consultation document and supporting documents that we've discussed all in confidential? At what stage do we have the opportunity? Well, when do we approve that? And my understanding, it has to be approved in public for that document to go out, except for the information that Kevin's talking about.
Yeah.
So when will that happen?
That happens right now. As soon as we conclude this item, that means that we have approved the material under confidential for consultation. As Kevin said, there'll be a disclosure committee. They will consider whether anything further needs to be disclosed to the New Zealand Stock Exchange as per the requirements on us. And the document, I'm imagining, will be released either tomorrow morning or sometime early in the day tomorrow. And obviously that then is in the public arena, not simply the consultation document, but also the supporting information. So all of the information that we have relied on to make our decisions, or the decision we're about to make, will be out in the public, so that the public will understand what we have considered prior to the release of this consultation document. Kevin, anything further you would like to add to that? Sorry, I don't know whether it's
Sorry, no doubt there was human error there on my part. I had the mute on.
It's okay.
Sorry, no, that's right. Just the one possible exception is if there's been conversations during the workshops related to things like commercially sensitive, such as the value of properties to be sold or anything like that. Those little snippets will be held confidential still. But generally, everything else you said is correct. Once the disclosure committee works its way through whether a New Zealand Stock Exchange release is needed, we then release all of the consultation documents, supporting information, noon tomorrow.
Okay,
that's right.
And the supporting information that we're releasing is the document that's in front of us now. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
So, Your Worship, sorry, just a supplementary, because I need to get it square in my head. So once we end up approving this confidential, it doesn't need to go back into the public of the agenda for the governing body for us to make that approval, because that is what normally happens when we end up talking about issues in confidential that we have approved. It goes back into open and public arena for us to approve that publicly, because going to Councillor Watson's point, there will be no acknowledgement of our staff and the work they've done publicly. So that's what I'm hearing is the process now that is followed as a result of the COVID-19 and the Emergency Committee. Am I correct in saying that it doesn't need to go back into the public agenda of the governing body for us to approve publicly?
That's correct, but I'll ask Kevin if there's any further comment he'd like to make on that.
No, that's correct. The governing body must make the decision as to what will be released for consultation. It just so happens this time it is in confidential because of our time constraints. If there is going to be a future restatement, then that's an opportunity to add any additional resolutions you may wish to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that's wrong, but look, I stand corrected.
Okay, I'm relying on the advice of somebody that's obviously been through this process quite a lot. Right, I have another question from Councillor Wayne Walker.
A general question first, Kevin. Would we be one of the few councils in New Zealand that is having to deal with confidentiality because of stock exchange requirements?
It'll be any councils that have shares issued on the exchange would have to go through the same process and assess the nature of what they're doing and whether the press releases are being done versus stock exchange releases. Yep, it'll be those councils, which are relatively few.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
And the particular shares that we're talking about that go to Auckland Council are what?
Well, we talk about the share. It's bonds that we've issued on the public market or other forms. So it's actually what's been recognised on the stock exchange. I see John Bishop was going to talk just then through the chair. If it's okay, John, maybe want to elaborate on that.
John, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So look, just to expand on that answer, the two other councils which have listed bonds are Christchurch City Council through Christchurch Holdings, and also Quayside Holdings, which is, I think, owned by a couple of councils in the Bay of Plenty. And also the LGFA, they have listed bonds as well.
Okay, so my further question, given that I'm supposing that we're going to continue to be active in the bond market, is there a facility that we can put in place where we can separate out those things that go to the bond market that may upset the issues there, so that the bulk of the budget we can deal with in public? Otherwise, we're going to be constantly in virtual confidential around matters, many of which are in the public interest, leading up to approving the budget.
Yep. Perhaps if I pick that up through you, the chair.
Kevin.
Yeah, look, if there is more time allowed for within the process, then you could have a process which involves the disclosure committee assessing what is going to be discussed and whether any of that would be of interest to bondholders, and then making that call to be made. So yeah, look, we can consider that and look at that in the process where we have more time rather than the time constraints we have for this particular round. We'll look at those options, Councillor Walker.
Can I make the request that we do that in the future? We know well in advance what the issues are that go to the bond market, and I wouldn't have thought it was too difficult to separate that out. So I understand the haste, but I also understand a high degree of predictability around this and the opportunity to plan in advance. I would suggest the most important test for us is around public transparency.
Okay, can I just make a comment here, please, Councillor? This is an emergency budget. Hopefully we won't be doing one of these every year. If we are, I think our finance team will be looking for alternative careers because the strain will be too great. In an emergency situation like this, we've had to do things slightly differently. But about transparency, look, within 24 hours, all of the material will be out in both the consultation document and the supporting information document. The process will be totally transparent, and councillors will have the opportunity both to acknowledge the work done by our officers, because I think that was a point Councillor Watson made, but also to comment on where we've got to and why we've put this document out for consultation in the form that it is. So there'll be plenty of opportunity. All we've got to do is just have that brief period where our disclosure committee makes sure that we are doing things that we are required under law to do and not in breach of any of our obligations. So that's quite important, but from this time tomorrow, everybody, this will be in the public arena. The media will be commenting on it. They'll probably be asking you for your comments on it, and you'll be free to make your comments, as I will be. Okay, so I think where we got to, if there's no further questions, we're about to put the resolution that we move into confidential. It's been moved and seconded, if I recall rightly. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. Carried. Now comes the difficult part. We now have to a 2-minute break, and we are going to a different. No, we're staying exactly where we are. So just a 2-minute break to ensure that we have the confidential connection. So if you could make a cup of tea in 2 minutes, please do so. I'll come back to you very shortly. Thank you. a roll call just to double check that everybody is there. So I'll start at the top. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes, sir.
Josephine Bartley.
Yes, present.
Kathy Casey.
Can anyone hear me?
Yep. Was that Kathy or was that Desley? That was Desley.
I'm here.
Kathy's here. Efeso Collins. No. Pippa Coombe.
Yes, here, Mr. Mayor.
Linda Cooper.
Yes.
Thank you. Angela Dalton.
Present.
Chris Darby. You there, Chris? Okay, come back to you. Al Filipina.
Gift, Your Worship.
Thank you. Shane Henderson.
Hello.
Oh, always so cheery. Richard Hills.
Kia ora.
Tracy Mulholland.
Present.
Thank you. Daniel Newman. Daniel. No. Greg Sayers. Nope. Desley, I saw before. Sharon. Have we got you there, Sharon?
Councillor Collins is on, Your Worship.
Yep, I see that on the sidebar there somewhere. Wayne Walker. Wayne is apparently on, I'm told, but I can't hear him. Wayne, can I get you to respond, please? Okay. John Watson and Paul Young.
I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So I'm still looking for Chris, you're on. I think I've got, did I see that somewhere?
Yep,
Chris, you're on. Yep. And Daniel, are you there? Okay.
I know he's been trying to get on, Your Worship. He's got terrible trouble with his connection, so he's trying to phone in.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Angela. Greg, are you back with us? Okay, we're still waiting for Greg as well. Sharon, joining now, I think, and Wayne. And then we've got...
Not without issues, but I've solved them.
Good on you. And I've just checked, I've got Tau Henare. Tau, you back on?
No, he's not here, Your Worship.
Okay, just yourself, David.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. So I think if we're, I'll just double check for Sharon again. I know she was trying to get on. Are you there, Sharon, yet? Okay. So Sharon, Greg and Daniel are still trying to get on. The first item is COVID-19. I think we might just get underway. We're 5 minutes over now. So I'd like to welcome Ian Maxwell and Phil Wilson, who are both here. I'm conscious that in response to a request I made last week, we have a report from the controller, the update, and so most of the information is contained in that. But Ian, if you'd like to walk us through anything else that we might be needing to know, and we'll try to keep this section reasonably tight if we can. Ian.
All right, look, thank you, Your Worship, and good afternoon, councillors. I won't run through the report that Kate and Mace prepared. It's probably worthwhile knowing that both are involved in meetings around recovery at the moment, and that's probably a clear indication that the emergency response is transitioning down, and we're obviously focusing more on recovery. Just to give you an indication of that, certainly the Ministry for Social Development is gearing up to provide support, particularly through to food banks and others, so that over time is where we will be transitioning to, and the expectation is that we will be out of the business of welfare and food over the next month or so while we transition through to the Ministry. And the Ministry's received quite significant amounts of funding to support food banks and so forth operating across the city. And it's very similar with the regional isolation and quarantine coordination that is expected to be transitioned away from our response team, away from the Emergency Management Office by the end of June. So that's a sign that we're coming towards the end of that sort of initial response work that's been undertaken, and that council staff which have been associated with that will be able to transition back to business as normal. I'll just move quickly on to where we are with respect to Auckland Council. Again, right across the council group, the move to Alert Level 2 has really gone without issue. Auckland Transport Services are running at around 35 to 40% of normal capacity. Bit of an indication there that that's fairly up there in terms of the actual capacity that they've got available given social distancing. So certainly people are back on public transport, and I'm sure you've all experienced the roads and the motorways. Regional facilities, the Auckland regional facilities attractions are reopening. While we've got capacity for around 30% of our staff, that's increasing to 50% next week. We've actually had right across the group probably only around 20% actually taking that up. So we still have many staff who are continuing to work from home on any particular day, but teams are rostering, so different people are coming in. And I think as we head into the future, we'll see a significant proportion of our staff continue to work from home, but rostering as in order to achieve their work requirements. Those essential services teams, which we split into smaller units during alert levels 3 and 4, are now starting to come back together, and you'll be aware from the recent press announcements that we're reopening many of our community services, our pools and libraries. They started last week, they continue this week, and they run into next week. And we've really had no issues to date, but attendances have been below usual levels. Recently, the government announced changes around social gatherings, so increasing it from 10 to 100, and we're still managing what the implications of that will be, but to date, there's been no particular issues. All of our governance arrangements, this committee I think is last meeting today, and we'll be moving more towards normal activities, and we are still deploying the social distancing and hygiene requirements, and really those things will continue into the future. We've started planning around level 1 as to what that may mean. So look, in general, I suppose the overall implication is that we're moving towards a more normal situation, and the focus is very much on matters which you've dealt with already today. What are the implications arising from COVID for council's finances and the emergency budgets and so forth? But from a health perspective, we're moving into a situation now where we're managing social distancing and hygiene requirements, putting in place processes to achieve that, and getting back as close to normal as possible. There is work going on around the water supply issue, and we'll have some more information to you regarding that. You're all aware that level 1 water restrictions are in place, and they are impacting council as well, around washing and cleaning of buildings and of roads and footpaths, those sorts of things. But we are also gearing up for subsequent water level reductions and how we as an organisation can respond to that. So there'll be more of that information coming through. So look, I'll stop there, and if there's any particular questions, I'll answer them now, or I can get back to people.
Thank you very much, Ian. Phil, is there anything you want to add to what Ian has said from the recovery perspective?
Not much, Your Worship. Morning, afternoon, councillors. Ian's talked to the transition matters. All I would add to this is that the project team in the recovery space is hitting its straps. Planning is getting reasonably well advanced. The concern that I've talked about previously about the need for alignment between central government agencies, other players in the recovery space, again, is coming along well. There are meetings for your interest today and again on Tuesday with central government agencies. So I'm pleased that out of that we will make sure there is good alignment and clear responsibility of different parties for recovery effort. Just finally, to note that quite a successful effort, Wellington-based, for the local government sector generally to coordinate around response activity is now moving into recovery mode itself to ensure that there is good resources, support and some central planning around recovery activity supported on a multi-agency basis and involving SOLGAM and local government New Zealand and Wellington. That's it, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Ian and Phil. If I just two brief items to update people on. In regard to recovery, obviously international students are important to us as a city, $2.8 billion a year in expenditure from them. I've been in contact with the Minister of Education, Chris Hipkins, who's been really helpful and cooperative, and with Auckland University and ATEED. And I put through to ministers last night a proposal for a trial for Auckland University to open up for some of their long-term and therefore high-value students with full quarantine procedures, and they would use a particular hostel for quarantine. There'd be 24/7 supervision, and if this worked, then that could be spread out to other educational institutions. It's notable that I've had a lot of submissions, not only from the educational institutions, but also Heart of the City. And the Heart of the City is a bit broken at the moment because there's still a huge deficit with domestic students, international students and tourists not coming, and people under a lot of pressure. But if we can pull that off by offering a partnership with government and not just saying open your borders, but we will work with you to trial the safe opening of the borders to a particular group, which is international students, that would be great. But I acknowledge that the government's got a pressure on it from a lot of groups, wanting to come in, and health has still got to be a critical factor. The second is just to indicate to councillors that in the last week I've been in touch with the Mayor of Hamilton, Paula Southgate, and the Deputy Mayor, Martin Gallagher. We know that Hamilton has got an unused resource consent for water from the Waikato. If they were to pass that to us in the interim, that would give us the consent to take the extra 25 million litres a day that the upgraded water treatment plant would be able to cater for. In principle, the council has supported that with their meeting yesterday. They'll put it before their formal council on, I think, in June. And we're hopeful that that will be part of getting another 36 million litres a day from a variety of different sources. So that's quite good news. I'm trying not to enter into battle with the Waikato Regional Council. I just think it's unfair to accuse Watercare and of being incompetent and not looking at sustainability. I checked the figures, and Auckland is the second most sustainable city in the country in terms of water usage, and that's really important. Lower per capita usage for residences than almost any other place, I think, except the Bay of Plenty. So just throw those into the mix. Now I have a series of questions, starting with Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a great report as always. I just want a quick question here. So our financial assumptions are that we're looking at level 2 for the first quarter of the financial year, then level 1 for the rest of the year. So how are we looking now in reference to the situation that we have today? Because it looks like things are getting better than we might have hoped.
Thank you. Good question. Ian.
These are alert levels in association with COVID. So I'm getting, there's also water restriction levels, so that's the reason for my question.
Yeah, if we go to level 1 more quickly than what we're anticipating, what impact will that have on the city?
Well, that will have a positive impact. So I think if we can, level 1 is essentially associated with border controls, but you've also seen situations where sort of key workers are starting to come in at the border, and the impression that we have is that that's likely to be extended. And I think what the Mayor has just outlined in terms of students could also come into that. But look, a move to level 1 will help our economy and indeed will help the finances of council. But it's a matter of having to take the right sort of assumptions, and we've got that included in the budgets that will go out for public consultation, and we'll have a chance to have a look at that when the consultation is over.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Casey.
2 questions, Phil, one for yourself and one for Ian. Ian, what difference has the rain made to the dam levels? Has that eased things off a little bit?
It's only a very small amount. I haven't actually got the figures in front of me, but I can
help with that, Ian. I get the figures each morning, Kathy. As of Wednesday, demand was down to 414 million litres a day, which is within the 420 target. Went over on Tuesday, but was below on Monday and Sunday. The lake level has come up from Monday at 42.9% to 43.4%. So it's had a marginal impact. It's stopped the further sliding and has lifted it just half a percent. But we need a whole lot more and more consistently. We're currently 34% less than the average for this time of the year.
Okay. My second question is for Phil Wilson. Phil, when will councillors get back around the table in any number?
Through the chair, this is the final emergency committee meeting. We resume committees of the whole progressively over the next while, and I will give you some, and I know that I'm not quite answering the question, Kathy. I will come back and communicate some guidance around councillor numbers around the table as opposed to coming in on Skype. If you could let me come back to you after the meeting on that, I will do so.
Thanks, Phil. I think we were thinking about 10 councillors could be present at this point, with the others coming in on Skype. Is that where you were heading, Phil? Okay, sorry, Phil, I don't think your mic's on there, mate. What Phil's been saying is he thinks that's about correct, but it depends on the rules at the time on social distancing. Okay, and it'd be great to see your smiling face back amongst us, Kathy. Councillor John Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for that good news with respect of Hamilton City Council and that consent. So well done on that. That's good to hear. And my question is to do with the water restrictions, and is really a request. Ian mentioned about the report back or information coming back in terms of the water restrictions. What I would appreciate is detail in that response that goes to how we're dealing or helping the small businesses, of which there are many that rely upon water blasting type companies for their business and keeping people in employment. And I think just not in terms of these non-potable sites that seem to have had a bit of a mixed success rate in terms of A, being up and running, and B, being satisfactory to the needs, but also in terms of the messaging that's going out over the restrictions. So one of the things I hear most strongly from these small businesses is that the people, the public, are basically just not contacting them. So their businesses, aside from everything else, is falling away because the public perception is that no, there's nothing water related that can happen, and that's, you know, A, it's a wrong impression, and B, it's causing quite a bit of additional hardship and difficulty for these businesses. And I think particularly in terms of signage, I know there's been no concerted signage to indicate that this water comes, the water that they're using is not from town supply. Non-potable as a term doesn't mean too much to people. You know, this should be Watercare or the council should have some signage that these businesses that can put up that's relatively inexpensive, that says the sources of this water is from bores, or it's non-restricted water, or some more appealing term. But more important than that, what overall messaging can help these businesses in terms of public, that there are businesses who rely on water, who don't drain on the town's supply, who are sourcing alternative sources, and their work can continue. So I maybe don't need a response now, Mr. Mayor, but I want something back that goes towards how we're helping in that area of these restrictions for these businesses.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. Look, you'll see in your diary that I've organised a briefing up on my floor on the 2nd of June. I think that's next Tuesday after Queen's birthday at 11:30. We'll have Watercare there, and that will be an opportunity for Q&As and following up on some of those points. What I am advised about is that Healthy Waters has worked really, really hard to try to maximise the access to non-potable water for construction and things like water blasting. I think probably with the goal of supplanting 3 million litres a day of potable water. But you'll have the chance to run through those questions directly with them next Tuesday. So I'm anticipating everybody will want to be along to that. So hopefully that'll be helpful to you. Linda Cooper.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually, just as a comment, I think a lot of this discussion will be really useful on Tuesday, and thank you for organising that Watercare briefing. I think that'll be really useful for councillors to work through that. And just to note, I've been seeing on the Watercare Facebook page some really good examples of businesses actually putting up the signs. We are using Watercare approved bore water, not dam water, and businesses are doing it themselves. So it's really good to see that. It lets people know. My question really was around your comments and May. Oh, we've got Ian here today. Around the working with Watercare. It's the last paragraph, last bullet point of your report. How have you found working with Watercare? Has it been with Healthy Waters, Watercare? Has that been a good relationship? Could do better? What's your view, if you don't mind?
I'm not sure. Is Mace there? No. All right. No. Look,
I think Mace is on the line now. Can I just double check? Mace, are you there? I was told he was going to be on. Yeah. Okay. He is there. Good. Mace, would you like to address that?
I think Ian might be in a good position as well, Your Worship, but generally, Councillor Cooper, through you, through the chair, we have a good relationship with Watercare in terms of working through our Lifeline Utilities Coordinator and Auckland Emergency Management, and more generally in terms of what Ian may cover off more is through ourselves, Auckland Council, as significant water users. So my home role, obviously in pools and leisure, we are a significant user, and we are putting in significant conservation measures as well. So I'm not sure if Ian wants to follow up, Your Worship.
Oh, look, thank you, Mace. Look, we have a good relationship with Watercare, and there are areas which I think as we head into if the water restrictions become more severe, there will be more impacts on business and economically, and potentially on the community in terms of welfare aspects. And I think we just need to gear up and look ahead and sort of do a bit of thinking and preparing as to what they may be. But I'm really confident that we've got a relationship and a group of people that can deal with those sorts of issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say I think that's going to be the key to working through wherever we end up, and hopefully it's with fuller dams, but is that integrated working at all levels, right from governance right through all of our staff, to actually be proactive. And I think we got all of it caught off guard and having to be reactive. And I think that this is where if we're going to make relationships better with CCOs, I think it's got to be a real family affair with working right through the levels of governance and management. But thank you, Mace and Ian.
Yeah, thank you for that, Linda. And on Tuesday, I think we'll be looking at the immediate challenge, the crisis that we're dealing with, and it is still a crisis. Yep, our lake levels have come up a wee bit, but we need a hell of a lot more rain right through winter and spring to head off a pretty critical situation later in the year. What we need to focus on too, and Tuesday will only be the first of these meetings, is what our medium-term response is going to be to improve resilience in the face not only of population growth but climate change. And I don't think any of us were expecting that the climate change, extremes in weather conditions would mean a drought this severe and for so long. So, maybe some people anticipated that. I wasn't one of them, but now we've got it. Yeah, we may have to build a whole lot of redundancy into what we do if we're going to have these sort of droughts, say, once every 10 years instead of once every 200 years. I think that's pretty self-evident. Councillor Coombe.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I make a comment at this point?
Yeah, sure. It's questions or comments, whichever.
Oh, great, thank you. And thank you for the report, Mace and Ian. And I just thought perhaps because Bill and I have been at the Central Government Forum this morning, it's kind of a good opportunity to make a few comments about what was said there in terms of Council's emergency response, because the Prime Minister and the ministers there all were very positive about what they've seen from Council's emergency response to the crisis. And I think everyone felt, around the table felt really proud about how local government has been in partnership with central government in terms of responding. So I did feel when I was hearing those comments and the feedback that that was definitely the case on the ground in Auckland. So I did want to just pass that on, and Deputy Mayor Bill might have a few comments to say about that, but also just wanted to, another comment that was made, not just in terms of talking about the, we're going through respond, recover, rebuild, and Grant Robertson spoke about how the fact that's not going to necessarily be in phases, it's going to be in waves. And he talked about the fact that because the emergency response has really shown how we can be agile, we can be flexible, it's going to provide a really strong foundation for the framework going forward and how we can work in partnership, not just with central government, but there was quite a bit of talk about how through the emergency response we've partnered with all sorts of organisations, and particularly with iwi, and how it's really shown there's a huge strength in the community and in organisations, and we just have to tap into it, which really will help us in terms of our recovery. So I just thought those were all very relevant points that were made at the forum. And just to note, just sort of another comment that was made in terms of, it's also highlighted the issues that we can deal with really when we are focused. And there was particularly comment about rough sleeping and sort of the inequalities that we've got in our community, and the crisis really put a spotlight on them. But it showed how when we're determined to respond, we have effectively ended rough sleeping overnight because we decided it was important. And so I think there was real recognition that this has put us in a much stronger position going forward if we can kind of continue that momentum. So that's kind of a long way of passing on a thanks to the tremendous job that has been done, but also how it's been seen in a much wider context and how it puts us in a much stronger position going forward. So thank you for that opportunity just to share some of those reflections.
Thank you, Pippa. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, Mayor, you just made some comments about sustainability and water care, and we're one of the best cities in New Zealand. But look, can I point out to everybody, we're an international city. We talk about the world's most livable city. We benchmark against other cities equal to us. We don't benchmark against Gore and Tauranga or Westport. And I think it's very, very dangerous to swallow the water care sound bites here. It does lead to choking, as is evident. Mayor, I invite you to have a look at cities like Copenhagen, which have a per capita water consumption of 2/3 of what, at least 2/3, going towards half of what we do here in Auckland. Can I go to a question about the motions that were passed unanimously calling for a workshop, which I understand with Watercare board members, all of them, and all the members of this emergency committee, including the Independent Māori Statutory Board, I understand because there's a moratorium on workshops, unless they lead to a decision in June, July, that urgent meeting on a critical issue that we're facing right now cannot be convened yet. Now I'm hearing there's some kind of workshop of a different category next Tuesday. Can somebody, the chief executive, I don't know who's on the line here, explain what is going on, please?
The short answer is the quickest way to get Watercare in front of them without putting pressure on staff was to convene the meeting myself on my floor. Once we get back into workshops, we'll be having a follow-up. This won't be restrained to one discussion. Councillor will be having ongoing discussions on the point about sustainability. I made the point purely because there was some attack on Auckland as being unsustainable from a council that was much less sustainable. So what I'm looking at doing is obviously trying to improve, and we have to improve, and we have to look at all of the options to ensure that sustainability and a resilient supply, which may be recycling wastewater at Rosedale. It may be taking more water from the Waikato if we ever get the consent in front of the body that's meant to be hearing it, and then we've got to make sure that we have local groups, including Tainui, on side. We need to look at desalination, even if it's expensive. We need to look at all of the options, including rainwater. So that will be an ongoing process, and when we're back to the normal process of workshops, I'm imagining that we will have a full workshop on that, and that may well be within your own planning committee jurisdiction.
So it actually does sit, I understand it does sit under Councillor Hills and Councillor Coombs' committee.
Okay,
but,
yeah.
But look, there are crossovers and we respect each other on that. But the words in that motion were an urgent workshop. And am I hearing that considering the crisis, the water crisis in Auckland, we cannot convene that urgent workshop because of the staff capability issues, capacity issues, at this time until August? I mean, this doesn't stack up. That's not reflecting on the motion. Yeah. So that needs to be addressed.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Chris. I'll just ask for officials for a comment on when they can convene that. It's probably not clear. Well, Megan, do you want to have a go at that?
Thank you. Yes, look, we know there's a lot of work that needs to go on because we want to make that a useful workshop for all parties. So we were looking at July, but I'm happy to hear feedback on that.
Okay, look, I'll just go to a couple of questions. Does anybody know what work Watercare did in evaluating the impact on industry, particularly the construction industry, prior to recommending to us putting in place the restrictions, and did it consult Auckland Transport and the NZTA?
My thought on that is not enough, but you'll be able to ask that question directly of Watercare on Tuesday. I've referred to Watercare the belief that more preparation needed to be done in that area, and I'm grateful for the really quick response from Healthy Waters in terms of making available non-potable water for some of the industries that might otherwise have been affected.
So there's no one on the line here today that can answer that?
I don't think so from Watercare on this session. They will be here for the next section, but that's not necessarily the people that you'd want to talk to.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, next question, Councillor, or comment, Councillor Wayne Walker, and finally, Councillor Greg Sayers.
Oh,
Wayne, you're on.
Just following up from the issue that Councillor Watson raised about the businesses that are affected. There is a high degree of urgency around this. We're talking about businesses that have obviously been affected by the COVID situation, and whether we like it or not, the perception that's out there is not to use water generally, irrespective of what the source is. Some of these businesses could go to the wall very shortly, and they're certainly being affected. So I have a concern that we need to act much quicker. It's, as far as these other water sources are concerned, less a water care issue and more an Auckland Council issue or healthy water issues. If we're talking about non-potable water, bore water, stormwater, roof water, and that includes tank water, spring water, they're not under water care's purvey, many of those water sources. So we need an all-of-council approach rather than simply a water care approach. There should be some branding and messaging going out, and that should have happened already because this has been predictable for some time. So I certainly endorse the comments that Councillor Darby is making about other cities in respect of benchmarking, and I just draw the Councillor's attention to a whole array of cities in Australia who may well be in our bubble in the not too distant future that have been doing many things around this this issue for some years, including encouraging water tanks. So we need to be acting quickly and should have a specific helpline up and running right now around this issue. So I certainly invite a response.
Yeah, I think Linda Cooper's comment was pertinent before. If I'm out there using a water blaster, people want to know where I'm getting the water from if that's against the regulations. So those industries that have put up a notice that they're using non-potable water, I think that's really sensible. But again, I think these specific questions, Councillor, you're welcome to put those to water care, and I agree that Water Care and Council have got to work closely together, particularly on the long-term future, and we need to up our efforts in that respect. What this drought shows is that climate change and its impact on extreme weather conditions and drought is not just something that will be minor and may occur sometime down the track in the future. It's major and it's here now, judging on our experience this year. So, looking at all of those options is important.
I follow what you're saying. Having said that, the main point that I'm making is that all of these other sources of water aren't under water care's control. Council influences them, so does the private sector, so do homeowners. So it's an all-of-council response rather than just a water care response, and bearing in mind they're in the business of buying and selling water. That is important. And we need to take a lead around that, and if anything, play a directive role in respect of water care. And I would also make the comment that this is an issue that goes to sustainability, but saving water also saves money, depending on the sources that it's coming from. So this can also go some way to addressing some of the budgetary issues that Council has got, because we do use a lot of water across all of our operations.
Thank you very much for that. Final comment, Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thanks, Phil. Over the last few weeks, I heard you mention kind of your potential options of solutions going forward was desalination. But just before I get onto that, maybe the council. I think the councils are making some good comments around the impact on the SMEs. I believe that you equally understand the issue as well. I do remember Ravine saying in one of our workshops or presentations to us that his organisation would. They're not going to really look at the water strategy off their own bat necessarily. They would take a directive from us as council and councillors and the governing body, and I'm sure we'll pick up on that. But look, just getting back to my point I want to make around desalination, and our in relation to water supply, there is a landfill proposed to go in the next 8 years up north in my ward in the Dome Valley, and that takes a significant amount. Will take the waste to landfill up there, and as you've mentioned, Phil, these desalination plants require a lot of energy, and there is technology available of these plants, these incineration recycling plants that basically take waste and turn them into electricity, cement, asphalt, glass, even affordable thermal paneling that can be used in housing. So they actually do recycle. The emissions they give off out of the kind of smokestacks are minimal. In fact, some of them are found within residential areas right inside of cities because the air quality is so good coming out of them. There's certainly, I've spoken to some of these firms based in New Zealand, and they confirm that the emissions are well below the standards required in terms of air quality within New Zealand. And of course, none of them would ever be located within a township. They'd certainly be in some sort of rural area anyway. So the point I'm wanting to make is that there's potential in our overall thinking to investigate further opportunities of protecting our environment, stopping landfill, these incinerating recycling plants being, perhaps could be part of the solution, particularly if they're producing power, which could then also, run a desalination plant and help us, in the long run. I think the obstacle isn't Auckland Council. It isn't these firms that operate throughout the world that have the technology. It probably isn't even the contractors that collect the waste. You need a partnership between all of them. The key one is central government. And at the moment, strangely enough, I guess, that the Minister of Conservation and an MP of the Green Party is anti them because of worries about the emissions that they make, which is strange. So what I'd like to plant a seed is, a conversation perhaps being held with the Minister, trying to understand the scientific reasoning and concerns behind why she's making that stance, because it's probably a bit of a roadblock in terms of that option going forward in terms of desalination plants, which provide not only water, but also would take care of, this practice of burying our rubbish in landfills and covering them up on earth rather than perhaps recycling them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Greg. That's probably a question we need to direct to our waste management people. I have made some investigation of that because the idea has come up quite frequently. Yeah, I think you can have scrubbers on your chimney stacks, but my understanding is that our waste management people and the general view of environmental experts is that incineration is not appropriate, but I think you're entitled to ask the question and entitled to get a more detailed answer than I can probably give you here. So that's something else to follow up. Just draw your attention to Bill Cashmore's suggestion on the sidebar to everyone, actually, that if you've got questions, maybe you can, if we can refer those, put them in writing to the Chief Executive so they come along prepared to answer some of the specific questions that you might have, that would be useful. Okay, look, thank you very much for that. That's been a useful discussion, and I'll move and ask for somebody to second. Maybe Councillor Sayers, if you'd second, thanks for those that have made the presentations today: Ian Maxwell, Mace Ward, and Phil Wilson.
Very happy to.
Moved and seconded.
And proud to.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no. Aye. Carried. We come now to item number 10, number 9, I'm sorry, on the agenda, which is a review of the findings of the Water Supply and Wastewater Network bylaw. And we do have, I've just checked that we've got them online at the moment, 2 representatives from Watercare, Rosalind Klein and Mark Bishop. Rosalind and Mark, are you on the line?
Yes, hello, can you hear us?
I can hear. Yep, you're both together. Yep, that's good. So just before I get you to introduce the topic, maybe Councillor Linda Cooper, you'd like to move?
I will, and I wouldn't mind. Normally at these we outline a little bit of the rationale for this, if that's possible.
I'll invite you to speak straight after our presenters from Watercare, and I'll just get a seconder. Is there a seconder for the paper?
I'll
second. Chris Darby.
Chris, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Rosalind and Mark, if you'd like to introduce the paper, please, and then I'll ask Linda to speak to it.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, sorry. You've asked me to, have you moved this, or did you ask me to move it?
I've asked you to move it, if that's okay.
Well, I'm not, I mean, the original didn't have, it's been amended. I thought it was an amendment that was coming, but now you've put it into your report without any discussion, and so I am a little bit reluctant because C actually assumes that isn't happening, and it is happening. And so that's my concern around that, and I just, it would be nice to discuss it with you before you just incorporated it in there.
I think staff have agreed that that's an appropriate amendment, but perhaps if I can ask Megan just to talk briefly to that. That might satisfy you in terms of moving the paper, but if you're still not happy, I'll simply get somebody else to move it. But if you could speak to that, please, Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, look, I've spoken to both Councillors Cooper and Darby about this morning. There's no issue from it from my perspective. Also, I know there was a discussion about maybe having it as a noting rather than a more directive one. So, look, I'm really in the hands of, the mover or Councillor Cooper in the sense of how she wants to deal with this.
So, Mr. Mayor,
sorry,
I'm not sure.
My mic was off. Linda, having heard that explanation, are you happy to move it, or would you rather have somebody else do it so you can speak to it?
And my concern is, in the light of our previous conversation, there seems to be an attitude of we must control Watercare, where in actual fact this is our bylaw. It is not Watercare's bylaw. They administer it, but we get the final say anyway, and our staff have been working with them. So I think there's a bit of misunderstanding that this is Watercare's bylaw and they need to be controlled. Well, it's not. It's our bylaw. And so that's why I'm a little bit confused. Watercare's role is suggestive, and we still get the final say on it. So that's why I'm confused as to why we would be directing or requesting that Auckland Council work with it. I mean, in my notes here, we actually work collaboratively, and that's why you've got about 5 people waiting on the line, both from Council and Watercare to speak to this if necessary. So that's what I don't understand, and I have a feeling it's, from my point of view, that it's about this, we must control Watercare because people are unhappy about other areas, and this bylaw does not address supply except the pipes that supply. It doesn't address the building of new infrastructure or planning. It's actually about protecting the networks in terms of interference. And so that's why I think it might be a little bit of overkill, that's all.
Okay, perhaps I can ask Councillor Darby to speak to it. I think the amendment originated with him.
Thanks, Mayor. And look, I did check in with the Chief of Strategy on this. I proposed this in light of the need for us to be more collaborative. And at the moment, as Councillor Linda Cooper points out, the councillor suggests that it's Auckland Council's point of control, but C actually, as it stands in the recommendation until amended, puts Watercare holding the pen, and the pen should be jointly held on the next stage, looking at the options report. So the Councillor Cooper says that it's joint. These words just confirm that it's joint. So Mayor, I'm wondering if Watercare are on the line. We've heard from our Director of Strategy on behalf of Council's management say that the amendment's fine. Can we hear from Watercare, having read the amendment, and ask them whether it's fine?
Yeah, certainly happy for Watercare to comment on the amendment if you'd like to, Rosaline or Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just confirming that this process has been and will be highly collaborative at a staff level with the regulatory team, but also in terms of approvals through the regulatory committee. So this amendment for us, from my understanding, doesn't change much the practice we've got, and it just highlights that there is a desire for collaboration. So yeah, just confirming this is highly collaborative.
Thank you very much. Having heard that explanation, Councillor Cooper, are you happy to move it now?
Yes.
Okay.
I just don't like the inference that somehow, I think if we read the paper, this is our bylaw. It's not Watercare's, but they do have a role in it because they have to administer it.
No, I think that's fine. So it's now been moved by Linda Cooper, seconded by Chris Darby, and if I can ask Watercare staff to speak to it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just checking with Councillor Cooper that it's okay for us to introduce it, or would you rather do it?
Well, normal practice is for the chair to introduce it, but I think the points I've made, I'd just like to make a couple of points, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Mayor, that Watercare have led the review, but it's in collaboration with our council regulatory team because we have the resources to do that. And also that the options report will go through regulatory committee and will be adopted by governing body. So it clearly is an Auckland Council bylaw, and it doesn't address future planning for water supply. It actually is about protecting the networks, and that is what this addresses. So other than that, this will come back to the option reports will come back, and then consequently it will go out for a statement of proposal, and then it will go to governing body. That's all I need to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks very much, Linda. I was going to invite you to make those points just after Watercare, but thank you, you've made those up front, and that's appropriate. If I can, I can return the presentation to Watercare at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to introduce this findings report, wanted to say that in the past few months since October, Watercare and Auckland Council staff have worked together to review the water supply and wastewater network bylaw. The outcomes of the review have been captured in the findings report, which have been attached to the agenda of this meeting. And in terms of regulatory dates, the bylaw was adopted in June 2015, so the review is due by 25 June 2020. We are working on an options report, and we intend to present it to the regulatory committee at the end of June if this is appropriate. In terms of the background and what the bylaw does, as said previously, it is administered by Watercare and it is an Auckland Council bylaw. The scope of the bylaw is a lot more narrow than a lot of people tend to think. It is indeed only to protect the existing public network from damage, misuse and interference, such as illegal connections or breaks of pipes through construction work and contamination. It also is the bylaw that establishes the provision of water use restrictions in case of a drought. So all privately owned network and assets, all questions of wastewater overflows, questions of water takes, question of trade waste discharges are not in the scope of this bylaw. The key findings of the report is that overall the bylaw has been working well, that it continues to be necessary, but it could be enhanced. The scale of interference with the network has increased as per the growth of Auckland pretty much. Stakeholders have been consulted in this first stage, so there is opportunity for more consultation coming, and they have considered the bylaw to be effective and efficient, but have given the feedback that some definitions could be clarified and some requirements could be made more specific. We've also had a review of how other jurisdictions do it, and found that the bylaw aligns well with how other jurisdictions regulate similar topics. So we're very happy to take any questions or give any clarifications if needed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've also got Auckland Council staff online, Paul Wilson and Magda Findlick. Is there any comment that you want to add at this stage?
Through the chair, no further comments to add.
Thank you. If I come back to you, Linda, is there anything that you'd like to add as the mover of this motion?
No, just really appreciate the fact that Watercare are working collaboratively with our staff, and also we need that to happen with AT with our transport bylaws as well. So this is a good model, and may it continue. Actually harking back to my previous comment about Watercare, that if we can work through all levels like this with our CCOs, we'll all be better off as a council family.
Thank you very much, Linda. Chris Darby is the seconder of the motion. Would you like to speak to it at this point? We're taking comments and questions at this stage, and then I'll go through alphabetically again with councillors. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Just some questions, really. There's reference in the report about working with Auckland Council teams. Can Watercare outline which teams have been worked with? That's my first question. Can you also comment on the options report? That was I think it's attachment A, isn't it? Where we see recommendations for next steps, etc. There's at paragraph 20, I think it is, sorry, that's in the main report, there's a 6th bullet point about decentralised water. Can you comment on that? Comment on the teams at paragraph 29, which I've just covered. Can you also comment on what was involved, what came out of the blue sky thinking, which is in the findings report at 2.3.1, and who was involved? And could you also comment on, I think it is 3.2.2, where there's reference to Purple Pipe Solutions. And my key question there is, what is Mana Whenua's view on Purple Pipe Solutions? So I hope you got those questions there, officers.
So long list of questions. Who'd like to have a go at it?
Excellent. I can have a go, Rosalind at Watercare, through the chair.
Thank you.
In terms of the Auckland Council teams that have been involved, so we've worked extremely closely with the regulatory teams, so Paul and Magda, who we have on the line. When I mean extremely collaboratively, basically the draft has been written and reviewed together, so that's been a very strong relationship. And then we have consulted with the teams that have actually, that are affected by the bylaw. So that's the Healthy Waters team and the compliance teams, and we've made sure to include their feedback to ensure that the bylaw works for them. So those have been the main teams included on the council side. So that's the first question. And then multiple teams at Watercare, because this bylaw affects a lot of Watercare's activities. In terms of the decentralization, we have done, as part of the preparation for the report, a review of how Australian jurisdictions what they include in their equivalent of bylaws, and there's more mention of rainwater tanks and decentralized water supply. So it was one of the findings of this work that they could be considered to increase the focus on those points. So we're currently reviewing this in more detail to inform a recommendation in the options report. In terms of the blue sky thinking, so that's not a step that is usually required in a bylaw review, as it is blue sky thinking is a real forward-looking strategic view of what are the trends coming up in the next 10 years to ensure the future bylaw captures that. So this was pretty much an internal exercise at Watercare to look at all the trends we see coming in the next 10 years, and through the findings report it identified a few trends that could intersect with the bylaw scope. So that's what we did through that. And the question of the purple pipe is a bit connected to the first one on decentralization, that in Australia there are a few provisions made to enable wastewater recycling and the use of recycled wastewater through a third network called purple pipe. So that's what we wanted to hint at in the findings report, is that we believe that, as was said previously, wastewater recycling could be a trend of the future, and we haven't discussed this with Mana Whenua yet. This specific point, I mean, we've engaged with Mana Whenua, but not this specific point, and this will be discussed at a Microsoft Teams meeting with our Kaitiaki Forum on Thursday next week.
Thank you very much for that. Could I just ask a supplementary on that point you've just made about rainwater and decentralised water supplies? I mean, how much work has been done? How much more are you going to be able to do within the time frame of this bylaw? And you know, what sort of potential exists in these areas in your mind to assist with the obvious problem that we have of more frequent droughts and more extreme weather conditions?
I guess the bylaw only looks at a small part of this question, as it is not about promoting the use of those tools. It's more regulating what are the responsibilities in terms of water quality once someone has a decentralized water system. So there's a separate piece of work that is going on currently with Healthy Waters to look at increased uptake of rainwater tanks. So that's in a different piece of work. So what we've looked at here is whether the roles and responsibilities around decentralized water systems can be made more clear.
Thank you very much for that. So it is a separate piece of work, and so you're not bound by the time frame of this, although there are some aspects obviously in this report that touch about water supply and drought. Can you give us a timeline as to when you'd feel confident about being able to take us to a higher level in terms of the discussion about greater use of rainwater, greater use of decentralised supply? What sort of time frame are you working in for that piece of work?
So at the moment, we are taking the lead of following the lead of Healthy Waters on that. In fact, I've got a phone call this afternoon to review with Healthy Waters a leaflet that is aimed at encouraging the use of rainwater tanks. So it's more their time frame at the moment. However, as part of the workshop that got mentioned earlier this morning, we could absolutely include a part on rainwater tanks as of now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's
so
a helpful
just a couple of questions to follow up then, Mayor. Thank you. Thanks for the supplementary questions. That draws some interesting information out. So just going back to the question, you told us about the teams that are involved. I didn't hear that the Chief Planning Office, that's our strategy team, was involved. And is that correct? Has Watercare engaged with the Chief Planning Office? I hear you've engaged with Regulatory and Healthy Waters. Have you engaged with the Chief Planning Office?
I think Megan Tyler was wanting to make a response to that. Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Darby, the Paul and Magda are actually in the Chief Planning Office, so they're in the policy team. So I think the reference to Regulatory is particularly in terms of our policy team. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councillor, you got another question?
The blue sky thinking, I heard that was totally internal, which seems rather odd. Why did Watercare contain themselves on the blue sky thinking and not extend out to Auckland Council?
So I guess through the chair, what's important to remember here is that the scope of this bylaw is extremely operational, based on the current existing assets. So the type of blue sky thinking we did is not on the future of water in Auckland, is really on what trends are we seeing, for instance, in terms of the damages done to our pipes and what could increase that. So we've really gone to the people who have an activity in those fields every day in an operational manner. However, when I say it's been internal to Watercare, maybe I'm misrepresenting the reality as in terms of those teams at Auckland Council that have worked with us have been privy to the findings we're getting through that and have been able to add their best.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much. I think what I'm hearing from you is that this bylaw deals with specifics, but obviously a lot of the things that we're interested in, particularly with the impact of the current drought, are outside of this bylaw and need to be addressed separately, but with some urgency. So thank you very much for that response. Okay, look, I'm just going to flick through the roll call to see if people have got any questions or comments before we put the motion. So we start at the top. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No, all good. Looking forward to Tuesday, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Nothing from me, Your Worship.
Thank you. Kathy Casey.
All good, Phil.
Thank you. Efeso Collins.
No thanks.
Pippa Coombe.
No comments from me, thanks.
Thank you. Linda, we've heard from Angela. Angela Dalton.
No, thank you.
Al Filippina.
Just well done, Councillor Cooper and the team, as well as Watercare. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Alf. I think Shane's popped out for a moment. Councillor Richard Hills.
No, thank you.
Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
No, thank you. All good.
Councillor Daniel Newman. Daniel, I think Daniel might be gone. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Your Worship. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Was that Daniel come back?
Yes, it was, Your Worship.
Okay,
Look,
Daniel, come back to you. You go now.
Look, thank you, Your Worship. Look, I just want to say, and it's been interesting, the discussion that's taken place, but you are right, Your Worship, that the issues that probably are most pertinent in relation to security of supply and planning and infrastructure sit outside of this bylaw, and I would hope that this bylaw is understood for what it is and that the process for its review will be respected. And if there are other issues that people want to address in relation to planning, probably that needs to start with the way in which the council itself plans for growth in the region, which then puts pressure on Auckland, on Watercare's infrastructure. And a lot of that growth is actually an exception to what was initially planned. So I want to make that comment, and I thank the officers for their work.
Thank you very much. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you. Nothing additional. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Desley Simpson.
No, thank you, and thanks, Linda.
Councillor Sharon Stewart. Have we got you there, Sharon? I think I can hear you, Sharon. Have you got a question or comment? Okay, I'll come back to Sharon. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Got a question stroke comment. So I understand the focus and the limitations of this bylaw. Quite obviously, we've got a whole range of aspects of water, non-potable bore water, stormwater, roof water, grey water, spring water that aren't the subject of this bylaw, but are receiving increasing attention. Is the way to approach some of the comparable issues that go to those other waters going to be the subject of a different bylaw?
I don't think so, Mr. Mayor. I think the thing is we've actually did a huge amount of work on our water strategy last year, and I think that strategy will really help inform our conversations more than this is just about the pipes that convey the water or the wastewater, more so. So I think unless there's something that comes out of that further discussion and you need a bylaw to manage or regulate it, it wouldn't be a bylaw solution.
Sure. I understand. Just in response to that, I did raise the issue of that strategy with an officer yesterday, and I was told it wasn't a strategy, just a discussion document. So I am concerned that what I thought was a strategy, if it's not a strategy, needs to be strategised and given some effect, because that need is now.
I'll just get Megan Tyler to comment on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just want to support what Councillor Cooper has said. A bylaw in broad terms really deals with particularly health and safety issues, so it is about the safety and use of the network as opposed to, where suppliers is got from or what the supply looks like. Secondly, in terms of Councillor Walker's question, there was a discussion document that was approved early last year. The idea of that was that it would work, could work into a water strategy. That has not been completed yet, and I know it's a topic of discussion that a number of you want to talk to and talk about. So we're thinking the workshop that we would be looking to do with Watercare and council staff would be a good opportunity to discuss it then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. That's really helpful. Councillor John Watson.
Fine, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Young.
All good, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And I'll just come back if Sharon is back with us. Sharon, are you online there? No, it doesn't appear so. Look, thank you very much for those comments and questions, councillors. I'll put the resolution moved by Councillor Linda Cooper, seconded by Councillor Chris Darby. I'll do it on the voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's very resounding. To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. Thank you very much to our officers who are present. Thank you very much for Watercare representatives being online with us today. We come to the last item on the agenda, which is consideration of extraordinary business, and there is none. So thank you very much, everybody. We got through in pretty good time today, and we made some real progress. So take care, have a good weekend, and I declare the meeting closed.